Picture the scene, September 1st, 1939. German tanks are storming across the Polish border. Planes are screaming overhead. The world is, at that very moment, being plunged into the single most destructive conflict in all of human history.
So how on earth did we get here? How did the supposed war to end all wars lead to something even worse? Well, it wasn't just one single event. It was more like a tragic chain reaction, a series of dominoes, each one tipping over the next until the entire world stumbled right into war. In this explainer, we're going to follow that chain and see exactly how those dominoes fell, one by one.
You see, our story doesn't really begin in 1939. We have to go back 20 years before that, to the end of World War I. The very first domino was the fragile and, as it turns out, deeply flawed peace that came after it.
Okay, so the Treaty of Versailles was meant to secure peace forever. But for a lot of Germans, it just felt like a national humiliation. It carved up their territory, it slashed their military down to basically a self-defense force, and it forced the entire country to accept 100% of the blame for the First War. So instead of healing any wounds, it just created this deep, simmering resentment.
And then there was the bill. Germany was ordered to pay reparations to the tune of £6.6 billion. I mean, just think about that number. It was a debt so completely crippling that there was just no realistic way Germany's war-torn economy could ever pay it back. It basically guaranteed economic chaos from day one.
So all of these things start mixing together into this perfect storm of instability. You've got this dangerous myth going around that the German army was stabbed in the back by its own politicians. You have millions of ethnic Germans who are suddenly living as minorities in brand new countries like Czechoslovakia. And Germany's new democratic government, the Weimar Republic, is getting hammered by hyperinflation that literally made people's life savings worthless overnight. And the world's new peacekeeper, the League of Nations, well, it was crippled from the start when the United States refused to even join. The whole peace was just built on sand. Now, all this weakness in the international system, it definitely did not go unnoticed. Pretty soon, some ambitious, militaristic countries decided to, test the waters. They wanted to see just how far they could push before anybody, decided to push back.
The first big test came in 1931. Japan invaded the Chinese province of Manchuria. And the world's response? Well, it set a really dangerous precedent. The League of Nations issued a very stern condemnation. So what did Japan do? They just walked out of the League. And that was it. No meaningful sanctions, no intervention, absolutely nothing.
Fast forward 4 years, and it's the exact same story. Italy's dictator, Benito Mussolini, decides he wants to rebuild a new Roman Empire. So he invades Abyssinia, what we know as Ethiopia today. The emperor, Haile Selassie, he actually went in person to the League to plead for help. And what was the result? Some incredibly weak sanctions that did, well, nothing. Britain and France were just so traumatized by World War I, they were desperate to avoid another fight at all costs.
So the lesson was becoming crystal clear, and you can bet there was an aspiring dictator in Germany who was watching all of this very, very closely. He was learning that the international community, for all its big talk, was basically paralyzed by fear. It seemed that aggression didn't really have any consequences. And that brings us to the central domino, the really big one, whose fall would guarantee a global catastrophe, the rise of Adolf Hitler and the Third Reich in Germany. Riding that wave of national anger and resentment we talked about, Hitler basically used Germany's own democracy to destroy it. He got appointed chancellor in 1933. Within a month, he used a fire at the parliament building, the Reichstag, as an excuse to seize emergency powers. A year after that, the president died, and Hitler just combined the two jobs, declaring himself the absolute leader, the Führer. Immediately, he started tearing up the Treaty of Versailles. At first, it was in secret, but then he just did it openly. He ballooned the army, brought back the draft, and unveiled a massive new air force, the Luftwaffe. Then, in 1936, he made a huge gamble. He marched his troops back into the Rhineland, a region that was supposed to be a demilitarized zone. And the response from Britain and France? A few feeble protests. That domino was getting very, very wobbly. This leads us to the last, desperate attempt to keep the peace. It was a high-stakes gamble called appeasement, and really, it was the point of no return. The pace of things started getting dizzying. In March of 1938, German troops just marched into Austria. The world did nothing. By the summer, Hitler had his eyes on the next target, Czechoslovakia. He demanded that the German-speaking part of it, the Sudetenland, be handed over. But this time, the Czechs were ready to fight. Europe was right on the brink of war. So, to avoid that war, British and French leaders flew to Munich. And there, they went all in on this policy of appeasement. The logic was basically, look, if we just give Hitler what he says he wants, which is to unite all the German-speaking people, he'll finally be satisfied and peace will be saved. So they agreed. They forced Czechoslovakia to hand over the Sudetenland. When he got back to Britain, Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain famously waved the agreement in the air and declared to the cheering crowds, "I believe it is peace for our time." And you can just imagine this immense, but tragically short-lived sense of relief that washed over Europe. But it was a false hope. It was a complete delusion. Just 6 months after promising he had no more territorial demands, Hitler broke his word. His troops marched in and they occupied the rest of Czechoslovakia. That was the moment appeasement died. Because for the first time Hitler had seized non-German territory, it was now brutally clear his ambition wasn't just uniting Germans, it was conquest. The failure of appeasement was the last real push. All the remaining dominoes were now basically guaranteed to fall, leading the world straight into its second global war in less than a generation. And then came the final shocking move. In August 1939, Hitler, a man who built his entire political identity on being anti-communist, did the unthinkable. He signed a non-aggression pact with his sworn enemy, Stalin's Soviet Union. And secretly, they agreed to carve up Poland between them. This unholy alliance, it removed Hitler's last major obstacle. He no longer had to worry about fighting a war on two fronts. With the path now clear, the result was a foregone conclusion. Hitler unleashed his war machine on Poland. The fight was incredibly lopsided. As you can see, Germany just had overwhelming superiority in tanks and aircraft, and they used it to pioneer this terrifying new kind of warfare, the Blitzkrieg, or Lightning War. 2 days after that invasion began, Britain and France finally honored their promise to Poland, and they declared war on Germany. But it was too late to save Poland, and it was far too late to stop the chain reaction that had been set in motion 20 years before. The very last domino had fallen. World War II had begun. So you see, the path to war was this long, complex series of failures and miscalculations and outright aggressions. And it leaves us with a really critical question. Was this conflict just inevitable? Or was there a moment, maybe in the Rhineland or in Austria or even at Munich, where just one of those dominoes could have been stopped and this entire catastrophe could have been avoided?